Welcome to HOA Anger. She loved winter rules because they came with fees. The tow-hook chain swung inches from my car, and Karen screamed that I had ignored 3 winter notices, and today was the final action unless I signed her compliance form on the spot. I am counting down, and you will not like the outcome. Her breath came out in angry clouds, and the freezing rain turned every surface into glass. I kept my hands in my pockets and my voice level because I knew she wanted me to lose it. The laminated policy sheet she held out between us had no readable text, but she waved it like a weapon. I work as a construction project coordinator, and I have dealt with plenty of people who think volume equals authority. This was different because this was my home, and Kathleen Brown was the records custodian for Northgate HOA, which meant she controlled access to every document I needed to fight back. She jabbed a gloved finger at the clipboard clipped to her hip, and the frozen clipboard clip snapped loudly when she tried to adjust it. You do not shovel to my standard. You pay to my standard. I let her say it because I was recording on my phone in my pocket, and every word she said was building my case. The tow truck driver stood by his cab looking uncomfortable, and I could see him checking his own phone. Kathleen turned to him and snapped something about getting ready to hook up, and he shrugged. My health has been fragile for the past year, and the sleep disruption from her harassment was making everything worse. I needed this resolved fast because I could not keep functioning on 3 hours of sleep while she invented new violations every other day. The snowbank beside my driveway was maybe 8 inches tall and neatly piled where the city plow had pushed it. Kathleen claimed I had created a hazard by not redistributing the snow across my lawn. I had photos proving the pile was city work and not mine, but she refused to look at them. Your camera does not matter. My minutes are the truth. She said it like she was reading a verdict, and I filed that line away for later. My phone storage was almost full, and I had to back up the video evidence before it got lost, which added another layer of stress to the whole mess. I told her I was not signing anything until I reviewed the notices she claimed to have sent. She pulled out a stack of papers from her coat and held them up, but did not let me touch them. 3 notices over 14 days, and you ignored all of them. I asked her to show me the certified mail receipts, and she blinked. There were no receipts because there had been no certified mail. She had printed the notices and claimed they were delivered, but I had checked my mailbox every single day and found nothing. I told her that, and she pivoted immediately to saying the notices had been posted on the community board near the clubhouse. I asked her when, and she said 2 weeks ago. The clubhouse had been closed for renovations for a month. She did not have an answer for that. The tow driver walked over and asked Kathleen if she had the authorization paperwork. She snapped at him that she had everything she needed, and he asked to see it. She refused and told him to do his job. He looked at me, and I told him I was the homeowner, my car was registered and insured, and there was no valid towing order. He asked Kathleen again, and she started yelling about how he was being paid to tow, not to question her. He pulled out his phone and called his dispatcher. I could hear him explaining the situation and asking if the work order had been verified by the property manager. Kathleen turned red and started shouting that she was the records custodian, and her word was final. The dispatcher told the driver to hold off until he got written confirmation from the HOA management company. Kathleen tried to grab the phone out of his hand, and he stepped back. She screamed that she would have him fired and blacklisted, and he just shrugged and said he was done here. The truck pulled away, and Kathleen stood in my driveway shaking with rage. She turned on me and said this was not over, that I would be fined for obstruction and non-compliance, and that she would make sure I regretted challenging her authority. I told her I looked forward to seeing the documentation, and she spun around and marched off through the slush. I went inside and immediately backed up the video to my laptop and cloud storage. My hands were shaking from adrenaline and cold. I replayed the recording and heard every threat she had made, every claim about notices that did not exist, and her refusal to provide proof. I had a neighbor who sat on a different committee, and I called him. His name was Marcus, and he had warned me months ago that Kathleen was running the Winter Safety Committee like her own private police force, with no real authority. He told me she had been escalating enforcement on homeowners who questioned her, and that the management company was starting to get complaints. I asked him if he could get me copies of the actual winter compliance policy, and he said he would try, but Kathleen controlled access to most records and was known for stalling requests. 2 days later, I received a formal notice in my mailbox. It was not certified and had no postmark. It was printed on Northgate HOA letterhead and signed by Kathleen Brown, records custodian. The notice claimed I owed $200 in late fees for non-compliance with winter safety standards, and that I had 14 days to pay or face a lien on my property. I photographed the notice and the envelope and checked the postmark again. Nothing. She had hand-delivered it. I called Marcus, and he told me to file a formal records request for all notices sent to my address in the past 60 days and to copy the management company. I drafted the request and emailed it that afternoon, with receipts to everyone on the HOA board. Kathleen responded within an hour. Her email said records requests required a processing fee of $50 and a 30-day wait period. I replied with the Florida statutes governing HOA records access and pointed out that basic compliance records were supposed to be provided within 10 business days and that fees were capped. She replied again saying that my request was overly broad and that she would need to consult with the HOA attorney before releasing anything. I forwarded the entire chain to the management company and asked them to clarify the records policy. They did not respond. That weekend, the gate keypad at the main entrance froze and my access code failed. I tried it 3 times and got an error beep each time. The car behind me honked, and I had to back up and use the visitor lane. I saw Kathleen standing near the clubhouse, watching me and smiling. It was the most obvious retaliation I had ever seen. I drove to the visitor parking area and walked back to the gate to take photos of the keypad screen showing the error. A dog walker was filming the whole thing from a safe distance, and I waved at her. She nodded and kept recording. I later found out she was documenting HOA harassment incidents for a group of homeowners who were planning a lawsuit. I filed a complaint with the management company about the gate access issue and attached photos. They responded 2 days later saying they had tested the system and found no problems. I replied with a screenshot of the error screen and the timestamp and asked if they had reviewed the access logs. No response. I called their office and got voicemail. I called again the next day and got a receptionist who said the property manager was out of the office. I asked when he would be back, and she said she did not know. I asked for his email, and she said she could not give that out. I told her I already had his email from previous correspondence, and she hung up on me. Marcus called me that evening and said Kathleen had escalated things. A vendor had been sent to my door earlier that day to verify snow compliance and provoke a reaction. I told him nobody had come to my door, and he said that was because I had not been home. The vendor had left a sticker on my door claiming I was not present for inspection. I went outside and found a bright orange sticker with no readable text stuck to my doorframe. I peeled it off and photographed it and the residue it left behind. Marcus said the vendor was someone Kathleen hired personally, and that the inspection had no official backing. He warned me that she was building a fake paper trail to justify the lien threat. I decided to get ahead of this and contacted a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Lisa, and she had handled cases against Northgate HOA before. I explained the situation and sent her all the documentation. She reviewed it and called me back the same day. She said Kathleen was clearly abusing her position, and that the lien threat was premature and likely unenforceable because the underlying fines had not been properly noticed or validated. She told me to keep documenting everything and to prepare for a hearing because Kathleen would not back down without a fight. Lisa also said I had grounds for a harassment complaint if Kathleen continued retaliating through gate access and vendor harassment. 3 days later, I received another notice. This one was also hand-delivered and claimed I owed an additional $300 for obstruction and failure to cooperate with the compliance inspection. The total was now $500. I forwarded it to Lisa, and she sent a response letter on my behalf to the HOA board and the management company. The letter demanded that all fines be rescinded, that Kathleen provide proof of proper notice and authorization, and that the HOA stop retaliating against me. It also requested an independent review of the winter compliance enforcement process. The letter went out certified mail with return receipt. Kathleen called me directly 2 hours after the letter was delivered. She was furious and started yelling about how I had no right to involve an attorney and that I was making things worse for myself. I told her all communication needed to go through my attorney, and she screamed that she did not care, that she was going to make sure I was fined into oblivion, and that she would personally see to it that I was forced out of the neighborhood. I stayed calm and let her rant while recording the call. She finally hung up, and I sent the recording to Lisa. Lisa told me to file a formal complaint with the state office that regulates HOAs. I drafted the complaint and attached every piece of documentation, including photos, emails, recordings, and the attorney demand letter. I submitted it online and got a confirmation receipt. Lisa said the state process would take time, but it would put additional pressure on the HOA to resolve things properly. She also said we should prepare for a potential hearing in front of the board because Kathleen would likely push for one to try to intimidate me in person. The hearing notice arrived a week later. It was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the clubhouse, and the agenda included a review of alleged winter compliance violations. I was required to appear and present any defense I had. The notice was signed by Kathleen and copied to the entire board. Lisa said she would attend with me and that we should bring printed copies of everything. She also said to expect Kathleen to have stacked the deck with board members who supported her. Marcus confirmed that the board president was in Kathleen's pocket and that the hearing would be hostile. The night before the hearing, I got a surprise. Marcus called and said he had obtained a copy of the actual winter compliance policy from the management company, and it contradicted everything Kathleen had been claiming. The policy required photographic evidence of violations, mandatory warning notices sent certified mail, and a minimum 10-day cure period before any fines. None of that had happened in my case. Marcus said he would testify at the hearing if needed. I thanked him and sent the policy document to Lisa. She called me back within minutes and said this was exactly what we needed. The hearing was held in a small meeting room at the clubhouse. The board president, 2 other board members, Kathleen, the property manager, Lisa, Marcus, and I were present. The dog walker who had filmed the gate incident was also there as a witness. Kathleen opened by presenting her version of events, claiming I had repeatedly ignored notices, refused inspections, and obstructed enforcement. She held up printed photos of my driveway and claimed they showed dangerous snow accumulation. The photos were taken from odd angles and made a small snowbank look much larger than it was. I had my own photos with timestamps and measurement references showing the snow was minimal and placed by the city plow. Lisa stood and asked Kathleen to provide copies of the certified mail receipts for the 3 notices she claimed to have sent. Kathleen said the receipts were in the files and she would provide them later. Lisa pressed and said we needed to see them now because they were central to the case. Kathleen got flustered and said she did not have them with her. Lisa then asked the property manager to confirm whether any certified mail had been sent to my address in the past 60 days. The property manager checked his laptop and said no certified mail was on record. Kathleen snapped that she had posted the notices on the community board. Lisa asked for photos or dated proof of the postings. Kathleen had nothing. Lisa then introduced the actual winter compliance policy and read the relevant sections aloud. She highlighted the requirements for certified notice and the mandatory cure period. She pointed out that none of those steps had been followed. The board president tried to interrupt and say the policy was just a guideline, but Lisa cut him off and said the policy was legally binding as part of the HOA governing documents. She asked if the board was prepared to ignore their own rules. The president went quiet. Marcus stood and testified that he had witnessed Kathleen escalating enforcement actions against multiple homeowners without following procedure. He said the Winter Safety Committee had no formal authority to levy fines and that all fines were supposed to be approved by the full board. The board president admitted that was correct. Lisa asked if the board had voted on my fines. The president said no. Lisa asked why the fines were being pursued then. The president looked at Kathleen and said it was her discretion as records custodian. Lisa said that was not how HOA governance worked, and that the board was liable for allowing rogue enforcement. Kathleen stood and started yelling that Lisa was twisting the rules and that I was a troublemaker who had brought this on myself. She said I had challenged her authority from day one and that I needed to be made an example of. Lisa asked her to clarify what she meant by making an example. Kathleen realized she had said too much and tried to backtrack. Lisa said the statement would be included in the record. The dog walker raised her hand and said she had video of Kathleen retaliating against me by disabling my gate access. She played the video on her phone and showed Kathleen standing near the gate panel right before my code failed. Kathleen tried to claim it was a coincidence, but the timestamps lined up perfectly. The board president called for a recess, and the board huddled in a corner. Lisa whispered to me that they were going to try to settle quietly to avoid further exposure. She was right. After 10 minutes, the president came back and said the board was rescinding all fines and that they would be reviewing the winter compliance process. He apologized for the confusion and said the matter was closed. Kathleen looked like she was going to explode, but said nothing. The property manager said he would send a written confirmation within 2 business days. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. 2 days later, I received a bill from Northgate HOA for $200 in records processing fees related to my formal request. The invoice was signed by Kathleen. I forwarded it to Lisa, and she sent another demand letter pointing out that the fees were retaliatory and unenforceable. The management company did not respond. Lisa said we needed to escalate further and file a formal complaint with the Division of Condominiums, Timeshares, and Mobile Homes. I did that and included the entire case file. A week later, an inspector showed up at my door. He introduced himself as a code enforcement officer from the city and said he was following up on a complaint about snow hazards and driveway damage. I invited him in and showed him my documentation. He walked around my property and took photos. He said there was no violation and that the snowbank in question was clearly city plow work. He said someone had filed a false complaint and that he would be noting that in his report. I asked who filed the complaint, and he said it was anonymous but submitted through the HOA. I thanked him, and he left. That was when I realized Kathleen had gone outside the HOA and was now trying to get the city involved. Lisa said that was a dangerous escalation because filing false code enforcement complaints was illegal. She advised me to get a copy of the city report as soon as it was available and to file a police report if the complaints continued. I called the code enforcement office and requested a copy of the report. They said it would be available in a few days. The next escalation happened at the neighborhood pool gate. I went to check my mailbox and found that my key fob no longer worked for any of the secondary access points. The main gate still worked, but every other entry required a physical key that I had never been issued. I filed another complaint with the management company and copied the board. The property manager responded this time and said the fobs had been reprogrammed for security reasons and that I needed to come to the office to get a new one. I went to the office and the receptionist said they were out of fobs and I would have to wait. I asked how long and she said maybe 2 weeks. I took a photo of the fob inventory cabinet behind her desk and it was half full. I sent the photo to Lisa. Lisa sent a letter to the property manager and the board stating that restricting my access was a violation of my property rights and demanding immediate restoration of full access. She also said that any further retaliation would result in a lawsuit. The property manager called me the next day and said I could pick up a new fob that afternoon. I did, and the fob worked. Marcus told me later that 3 other homeowners had also had their fobs deactivated around the same time, and that it was part of a broader retaliation campaign by Kathleen. I let her threaten a lien, because that threat would look terrible on the record. She did exactly that. 2 weeks after the hearing, I received a certified letter from the HOA attorney stating that I owed $500 plus an additional $200 in administrative fees and legal costs, and that if I did not pay within 10 days, the HOA would file a lien on my property. The letter was copied to Kathleen and the board. I forwarded it to Lisa, and she laughed. She said this was the best thing that could have happened because it proved the HOA was acting in bad faith despite the board vote to rescind the fines. Lisa drafted a response that included a detailed timeline, copies of the board meeting minutes showing the fines were rescinded, and a demand that the HOA attorney withdraw the lien threat or face a countersuit for harassment and abuse of process. She also included the city code enforcement report showing no violation existed. The report had been released, and it explicitly stated that the complaint was unfounded and that no hazard was present. The report also noted that the complainant had provided false information. The HOA attorney backed down. He sent a letter to Lisa stating that the lien threat was withdrawn and that the matter was closed. He did not apologize. Lisa said that was typical, and that the real win was that we now had a clear paper trail showing the HOA had acted improperly. She said we should wait and see if Kathleen tried anything else. Kathleen tried one more thing. She scheduled a special meeting of the Winter Safety Committee and invited every homeowner who had been fined in the past year. The meeting notice said the purpose was to review compliance standards and clarify enforcement procedures. It was obvious she was trying to rally support and paint herself as the victim of overly aggressive homeowners. Lisa advised me not to attend because it was a setup. Marcus went instead as my proxy and recorded the meeting. Kathleen opened the meeting by complaining about homeowners who hired attorneys to avoid paying legitimate fines. She said the HOA was under attack from people who did not respect the rules. She played audio of one of her phone calls with me where I had told her all communication needed to go through my attorney. She claimed this proved I was obstructionist. What she did not realize was that she had also included her own rant where she said she would fine me into oblivion and force me out of the neighborhood. Your camera does not matter. My minutes are the truth. The recording played on speaker, and the room went silent. Several homeowners stood up and said they had experienced similar threats. One woman said Kathleen had told her the same thing almost word for word. The meeting fell apart after that. Homeowners started comparing notes and realized Kathleen had been using the same tactics on all of them. Someone suggested filing a group complaint with the management company. Someone else said they should demand Kathleen be removed from her position. Marcus called me after the meeting and said it was the beginning of the end for Kathleen. He said at least 6 homeowners were now talking to attorneys. If you are enjoying this story, hit like and subscribe for more tales of HOA karma and neighborhood justice. The management company finally acted. They sent an email to the entire board stating that they had received multiple complaints about winter compliance enforcement and that they were launching an internal review. They also said that all pending fines related to winter violations were suspended pending the outcome of the review. Kathleen was not copied on the email, but someone forwarded it to her anyway. She sent a furious reply-all email saying the management company had no authority to suspend fines and that she would not cooperate with any review. The management company responded by stating that Kathleen was not authorized to communicate on behalf of the board and that all future correspondence should go through the board president. The board president sent his own email shortly after, distancing himself from Kathleen and saying the board supported the management company review. He also said that the Winter Safety Committee would be temporarily suspended. Kathleen replied again, saying she had been elected to the committee by the homeowners and could not be removed. The board president corrected her and said the committee was appointed by the board, not elected, and that all appointments were at the discretion of the board. Kathleen stopped replying after that. The management company hired an independent auditor to review all winter-related fines issued in the past 2 years. The auditor found that over 30 homeowners had been charged fines that did not follow proper procedure. The total amount was over $15,000. The auditor also found that Kathleen had been charging processing fees for records requests that exceeded the statutory caps, and that she had been selectively denying access to homeowners who challenged her. The report was damning. The board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Kathleen from her position as records custodian. They also voted to refund all improper fines with interest. The management company sent individual letters to every affected homeowner, explaining the findings and providing refund checks. My check arrived 2 weeks later and included the $500 in fines plus $200 in processing fees plus interest. The letter also included a written apology from the board president. Kathleen tried to fight the removal, but the board refused to budge. She showed up at the next board meeting and demanded to speak, but the president said her time was up and moved on to the next agenda item. She yelled that she would sue the board and the management company, and the president said that was her right, but she was no longer recognized as having any official role. She stormed out and was never seen at another meeting. Marcus told me later that Kathleen had tried to run for a board seat in the next election, but was voted down by a landslide. Homeowners had not forgotten what she did, and word had spread about the audit findings. She eventually moved out of Northgate, and I never saw her again. The HOA sent a correction email retracting the smear, and I received a written reversal from management with a real citation confirming that no violations had occurred and that all enforcement actions had been improper. The email went to every homeowner and included a summary of the audit findings. It was the closest thing to a public apology I was going to get, and it felt good to see it in writing. The funny karma moment came a few months later when the insurance company that covered Northgate HOA sent an email to the board saying they were reviewing the policy because of the harassment complaints. Someone forwarded the email to the homeowner group chat, and it said the insurer was concerned about liability exposure from improper enforcement actions. The email specifically mentioned the winter compliance audit and said the insurer wanted to see updated policies and training before renewal. Karen had spent so much time saying it was about safety, and now the insurer was telling the HOA to stop because of the liability she created. I kept living in Northgate and never had another issue with the HOA. The new records custodian was professional and responsive. The board reformed the winter compliance process and required proper notice and board approval for all fines. The neighborhood became a quieter place, and people stopped worrying about surprise enforcement actions. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned that documentation is everything, and that staying calm in the face of harassment is the best defense. I learned that bullies like Kathleen rely on intimidation, and that once you stand up to them, they crumble. I learned that HOAs are only as good as the people running them, and that homeowners have more power than they think if they are willing to organize and push back. The frozen clipboard clip that snapped that morning became a symbol for me. It was the moment I realized Kathleen was all bluster and no substance. Every threat she made after that was just noise. The tow truck driver saw it. The board saw it. The auditor saw it. And in the end, the neighborhood saw it too. I hope you stay well.